This poor girl was humiliated by a rich, snobby and greedy woman, but her kind-hearted husband sees it and is furious. What she does next shocks everyone. Comment your name so I can get to know you better and subscribe to the channel to support my work. The sun was beginning to set over Willow Creek, casting orange hues across the sky that contrasted with the heavy clouds gathering in the distance. In the parking lot of Miller's Supermarket, one of the busiest in downtown, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up near the main entrance. From the driver's seat, a woman of about 40 stepped out, dressed in a flawless tailored suit and high heels that clicked on the asphalt. Brenda adjusted her perfectly styled brunette hair and walked to the back door of the car, where her husband George waited patiently. With mechanical gestures and without showing any affection, she opened the door and pulled the wheelchair from the trunk. "Let's get this over with, George. I have a 6 o'clock appointment," she said, checking her gold wristwatch as she helped her husband into the chair. George, a 67-year-old man with kind eyes and grey hair, simply nodded in silence. His fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the arms of the chair, and his stooped posture revealed not only the weight of age, but also the burden of a life controlled by others. On the sidewalk in front of the market, a little girl watched the activity with attentive and hungry eyes. Lily, not yet 6 years old, wore a faded dress that had seen better days. Her bare feet were dirty with street dust, and her dark hair, tangled by the wind, framed a face that carried a sadness incompatible with her age. A few yards away, her sister, Kayla, 14, was rummaging through the dumpsters behind the market in search of anything they could use. "Stay seated here, Lily. Don't leave this spot," she had ordered before walking away, but hunger was stronger than any order. Lily watched as Brenda began walking toward the supermarket entrance. Without thinking twice, the girl stood up and ran toward her, extending her small, dirty hand. "Ma'am, do you have a little piece of bread?" she asked in a trembling voice. Brenda stopped abruptly, as if she had been struck by something repulsive. Her eyes scanned the girl's figure with a mixture of disgust and irritation. Without saying a word, she shoved Lily with her designer purse, causing the little girl to lose her balance and fall seated on the hot asphalt. The impact elicited a groan of pain from the girl's lips. People around pretended not to see, some even quickening their pace to distance themselves from the scene. But from the back seat of the car, where he was still waiting for the driver to come and get him, George watched everything with a heavy heart. "Maria!" he called in a weak but determined voice. The driver, who was organizing some packages in the trunk, approached quickly. "Please go to that little girl. See if she's okay." Before Maria could move, Brenda returned, her heel banging loudly on the ground. "Don't even think about it, George. They're just more street urchins trying to get attention. Let's go. We're already late." But something in that child's expression had touched George deeply. It was as if, for a brief moment, he had glimpsed a ghost of his past in Lily's frightened eyes, a memory he couldn't quite reach, but that made his chest ache. Kayla came running when she saw her sister fall. She knelt beside Lily, examining her arms and legs for injuries. "What happened? Didn't I tell you to stay seated?" "Sorry, Kaylee," Lily whispered, tears running silently down her dirty face. "I was so hungry." George watched the interaction of the sisters with a lump in his throat. There was something familiar about that scene, something that made his heart beat faster and his mind spin in search of lost memories. "Maria," he called again, his voice now firmer. "Please, follow those girls, discreetly. I want to know where they're going." Brenda, who had already taken the wheel, turned around with eyes flashing with anger. "Have you lost your mind? We're not going to get involved with people like that. Enough of playing the fool, George." But for the first time in many years, George was not intimidated by his wife's threatening tone. Something inside him had awakened, a strength he thought he had lost long ago. "Maria will follow the girls," he said, his voice low but inflexible. "And you will drive in silence, Brenda." The rest of the ride was tense, with Brenda gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. George kept his eyes fixed on the window, his thoughts constantly returning to the scene he had witnessed. At night, lying in his king-size bed in the master bedroom of the mansion, George couldn't sleep. Fragmented images danced in his mind, a young woman crying, a child being taken away, screams, muffled by thick walls. But everything was blurry, as if his memories were covered by a thick veil that he couldn't remove. Brenda came into the room carrying a glass of water and some pills. "Time for your medicine, dear," she said, her voice, now saccharine, completely different from the tone she had used earlier. George swallowed the pills mechanically, as he did every night. But this time, something inside him screamed that something was wrong. Very wrong. Maria knocked discreetly on the door, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. George, I found out where the girls are," she whispered, taking advantage of the fact that Brenda had gone to the bathroom. "Bring them here," he replied without hesitation. "Tomorrow morning, I don't care what Brenda says." That night, as the rain began to fall over Willow Creek, 3 lives were about to intertwine in a way that no one could have predicted. And fate, through the innocent hands of a street girl, had begun to unravel the knots of a carefully buried past. The morning arrived cold and damp at the St. Francis shelter, where Kayla and Lily shared a small room with 3 other girls. Breakfast was always the same: stale bread with margarine and a glass of weak coffee with milk. Kayla watched her younger sister eat slowly, savoring each piece as if it were a delicacy. "Kaylee, Mrs. Thompson said they're going to have to send some girls to another shelter," whispered one of the roommates. "They say it's too crowded here." Kayla's heart froze. The idea of being separated from Lily was her worst nightmare. Since they were abandoned by their mother 3 years ago, she had taken on the role of protector of her sister. She slept hugging her on stormy nights, told invented stories to make her sleep, saved part of her food when Lily was hungrier. A car parked in front of the shelter, drawing the girls' attention. It was the same vehicle from the day before, and Maria, the driver, got out. Kayla instinctively pulled Lily behind her. "Kayla and Lily," Maria called, approaching the gate. "Mr. George would like to talk to you." Mrs. Thompson, the shelter coordinator, a gray-haired woman with a stern expression, approached suspiciously. "Who is this man? What does he want with the girls?" "He owns Miller's Bakeries," Maria explained. "He saw the girls yesterday and was worried. He wants to help." Kayla held Lily's hand tightly. They had been through similar situations before, people who appeared promising help, but disappeared as soon as they realized the work that 2 children would give. However, something in Maria's expression was different. There was genuine urgency in her eyes, a concern that did not seem forced. After much insistence and the guarantee that they would return before nightfall, Mrs. Thompson allowed the girls to go. The ride to the Almeida mansion was silent, with Kayla keeping Lily close and watching every detail of the way. The house was imposing, with a well-kept garden and a marble fountain at the entrance. But it was the look of Brenda, standing at the top of the main staircase, that made Kayla want to turn back immediately. "What does this mean?" Brenda shouted, descending the steps with heavy steps. "Maria, have you lost your mind, bringing these... "I asked her to bring them." George's voice sounded firm from the veranda where he was in his wheelchair. "And they are our guests, Brenda." What followed was an explosion of fury. Brenda screamed, gesticulated, threatened to leave the house. She threw a crystal vase against the wall, causing Lily to shrink back in fear behind her sister. "You can't do this to me, George," she yelled. "I won't accept 2 beggars in my house. I won't." But something had changed in George. The usual submission had given way to a silent determination. "This is my house too, Brenda, and they stay." Maria led the girls to a room on the 2nd floor, while Brenda's screams still echoed through the house. The room was larger than the entire dormitory they shared in the shelter, with 2 soft beds and a private bathroom. "You can take a bath and change clothes," Maria said, opening a closet full of new pieces, still with tags. "Mr. George provided everything last night." Kayla helped Lily with the bath, scrubbing years of dust and sadness from her skin. When the girl came out of the bathroom wearing a new pink dress, her eyes shone with happiness. But the joy was short-lived. During lunch, served in the immense dining room, Brenda made a point of sitting far away from the girls, as if they were carriers of some contagious disease. Her acidic comments cut through the air like knives. "Careful with the silverware," she quipped. "They are family heirlooms. Not that you understand the value of that." George barely touched the food, his eyes fixed on Lily. There was something in her, in the way she tilted her head, in the way she smiled shyly, that made his head ache with memories he couldn't reach. In the afternoon, when Brenda left for one of her social engagements, George asked the girls to come to his study. The room was cozy, with walls lined with books and a large window overlooking the garden. "Tell me about yourselves," he asked gently. "How did you end up in the shelter?" Kayla hesitated, but something in his voice inspired confidence. "Our mother left us there 3 years ago. She said she was going to work in another city and would come back to pick us up. She never showed up again." George felt a pang in his chest. The story sounded strangely familiar, like a distant echo of something he should remember. The moment was interrupted by Brenda, who abruptly entered the study, carrying a tray with a glass of juice and several pills. "Time for your medicine, dear," she said with false sweetness. "You know how you get when you delay your medication." Kayla watched attentively as Brenda poured a white powder into the juice, mixing quickly. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed that some pills looked different from others. That night, after everyone had retired, Kayla couldn't sleep. Something was wrong in that house. George's kindness seemed genuine, but there was a dark shadow hovering over everything, and that shadow had a name: Brenda. She got up silently and went to the hallway. The house was silent, except for a low noise coming from the master bedroom. She approached carefully and put her ear to the door. "You're ruining everything, George." Brenda's voice was just a threatening whisper. "Years of planning, and you want to throw it all away because of 2 urchins? There's something in them, Brenda." George's voice sounded weak, choked. "Something I should remember." "Nonsense! They're just 2 more dirty orphans you want to help out of pity. But I won't allow you to destroy everything I've built. Tomorrow they go back to the hole they crawled out of." Kayla retreated silently, her heart beating fast. She needed to find out what was going on in that house. Why did George seem so familiar? Why was Brenda drugging him? And why did their presence cause so much discomfort? Back in the room, she hugged the deeply sleeping Lily. "I'm going to find out the truth," she promised silently, "and no one will separate us again." But Kayla had no idea that at that very moment, Brenda was in her private office, burning old photographs and documents that could reveal a truth long buried. A truth that would forever change the fate of that fragmented family. The days at the Almeida mansion followed a strange and tense routine. Kayla watched every detail, every gesture, every word said or silenced. Brenda maintained constant surveillance over George, controlling his schedules, his meals, and especially his medications. The teenager noticed that after each dose, the man became more confused, with increasingly frequent lapses in memory. One particularly cold morning, while helping Maria organize some closets, Kayla found an old box of photographs hidden in the bottom of a trunk. Her hands trembled as she held a photo yellowed with time. A young woman, with features very similar to hers, held a baby in her arms. The date on the back indicated that the photo was over 15 years old. "What are you doing here?" Brenda's sharp voice made her jump. The woman snatched the photograph from her hands violently. "Who gave you permission to mess with my things?" "Sorry, ma'am," Kayla muttered, but her eyes remained fixed on the photo that Brenda was now crushing between her fingers. "That woman. She looks like—" "Get out of here," Brenda ordered. "And if I catch you snooping again, you and your sister, go straight back to the shelter." Kayla ran away, her heart beating wildly. That woman in the photo, there was something familiar about her, something that made her stomach churn. She needed to find out more. At night, after everyone had retired, the teenager waited for Brenda to leave for her usual social engagement and went silently down to the study. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the large clock in the room and the heavy breathing of George, who was sleeping under the effect of the medication. Carefully, Kayla rummaged through the drawers of the office. In one of them, she found a brown envelope with old documents. Her heart almost stopped when she read the first paper. It was a birth certificate. The mother's name was Clara Almeida. "Almeida?" she whispered to herself, confused. It was the same last name as George. She continued reading the documents with trembling hands. There were hospital records, newspaper clippings, and at the bottom of the envelope, a letter that was never sent. The handwriting was delicate, feminine handwriting. "Dearest brother George, by the time you read this letter, I will probably be gone. The doctor said I don't have much time, and I need to make sure my daughters are taken care of. I know you and Brenda have a settled life, but you are the only family I have left. Please, take care of my girls. Kayla is still very young, and Lily has just been born." The letter fell from Kayla's hands. The world seemed to spin around her. Clara Almeida was her mother. George was her uncle. All those stories about abandonment, were they lies? A noise made her quickly hide behind a heavy curtain. Brenda entered the study, turning on only a lamp. She seemed agitated, rummaging through drawers and burning papers in a small metal trash can. "Those little pests can't find out," she muttered to herself. It was already too difficult to make George forget his sister. "I'm not going to lose everything now." Kayla covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Years of lies, of suffering in the shelter, when they had family, when they could have had a home. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Brenda quickly turn off the lamp. It was Maria looking for Kayla. "The girl is gone," said the maid, worried. "Mr. George is asking for her." Brenda laughed, a cold and cruel sound. "Let him ask. Tomorrow I'll get rid of those two. I've already arranged for their transfer to a shelter in another city, far away from here." Kayla waited for them to leave to run back to the room. Lily slept peacefully, unaware that their lives were about to change drastically. Again. The next morning, George woke up more lucid than usual. He had refused the juice for breakfast, claiming a stomachache. His eyes, normally clouded by medication, had a different glow when they landed on Kayla. "You look so much like someone," he said, his voice choked. "Someone I should remember." Before Kayla could answer, Brenda entered the room like a hurricane. "The social services car is already arriving," she announced with false concern. "It seems they found relatives of the girls in another city." "No!" George tried to get up from the wheelchair, but his fragile legs gave way. "They can't leave. It's for their own good, dear." Brenda smiled, her saccharine tone contrasting with the cruel glint in her eyes. "You know we're not in a position to take care of two children, not with your health so fragile." Kayla held Lily's hand tightly. They couldn't leave now, not when they were so close to discovering the truth. But what could they do? They were just two girls against an adult woman who controlled everything and everyone in that house. It was then that Maria came running in, her face pale with worry. "Mrs. Brenda, urgent phone call from the bank, something about a suspicious transfer." Brenda left in a hurry, cursing under her breath. It was the chance Kayla needed. "Mr. George," She quickly approached the wheelchair. "Did you have a sister named Clara?" The name hit George like a lightning bolt. His hands began to tremble, and his eyes filled with tears. "Clara, my sister Clara. She was sick, had 2 girls." "Yes!" Kayla held his hands. "It was us, Lily and me. You're our uncle." A cry of anger cut through the air. Brenda was back, her face contorted with fury. "You little busybodies! Do you think you can destroy everything I've built?" She advanced towards Kayla, but was stopped by Maria, who placed herself between them. "Enough, ma'am. I'm not going to let you hurt these girls." "How dare you?" Brenda pushed Maria hard. "You're fired. You'll all regret getting in my way." But something had changed in George. The fog that covered his mind was beginning to dissipate, the memories returning like a river after the rain. You lied to me, Brenda. All these years, my sister, my niece, She never wanted us here," Kayla said, tears running down her face. "You separated us, didn't you? When our mother died, you sent us to the shelter and made Mr. George forget." The sound of sirens cut through the air. Maria had called an ambulance, worried about George's condition, who was now trembling violently. "No one will believe you," Brenda shouted, her control finally unraveling completely. "I'm the one who controls everything here. Everything!" But she was wrong. At that moment, several people entered the room. Mrs. Thompson from the shelter, the family doctor, and some neighbors who had suspected for years that something was wrong in that house. The chaos that ensued in the Almeida mansion that morning was deafening. The paramedics struggled to stabilize George, who alternated between moments of crystal-clear lucidity and profound confusion. Every time he opened his eyes, he looked for Kayla and Lily, as if fearing that they might disappear at any moment. Brenda had locked herself in her office, screaming through the door that she would call her lawyers, that no one could prove anything against her. The sound of papers being torn and drawers being ransacked echoed through the house. Mrs. Thompson, the director of the shelter, sat next to Kayla on the living room sofa, hugging the girl who was now crying copiously. "Why didn't anyone look for us before? Why did they let us suffer alone for so long?" The woman sighed heavily, her eyes filled with an ancient sadness. "Your mother, Clara, came to the shelter 3 years ago. She was very sick, barely able to stand. She said she had a rich brother, but that his wife did not allow contact. We thought it was the delusion of the disease." Maria, who had worked in the house for more than 2 decades, completed the story. Mrs. Clara tried to talk to Mr. George several times, but Mrs. Brenda always intercepted the letters, the calls. When she died, Mrs. Brenda said that she would take care of everything, that the girls would be taken to a better place. "But she abandoned us in the shelter," Kayla exploded, her voice choked with anger and pain. "Separated us from the only family we had." Lily, who had been quiet in a corner, approached her sister with hesitant steps. Her big brown eyes were teary. "Kaylee, is Uncle George going to die?" The hearts of everyone in the room tightened with the girl's innocent question. The doctor, Dr. Paolo, who was examining some medicine bottles found in the couple's room, shook his head with concern. "These medications, some are extremely strong, controlled. The combination of them could easily cause mental confusion, memory loss, muscle weakness. Someone was deliberately drugging Mr. George." Upstairs, there was a sound of breaking glass. Brenda had finally left the office, and now wandered the halls like a cornered animal, her perfectly styled hair now in complete disarray. "You don't understand," she shouted, coming down the stairs. "I did all this for us. That Clara was an embarrassment to the family, got pregnant without getting married, lived asking for money, and George, always so nice, wanted to help, wanted to bring those people into our house." Maria stepped forward, years of hurt and resentment finally overflowing. "You destroyed his life, isolated Mr. George from everyone who loved him, controlled every aspect of his life." "He's my husband," Brenda snarled. "Everything I did was to protect our assets. Do you think two street children deserve to inherit the bakeries, the mansion? I built all this." It was at that moment that George's weak voice cut through the air, surprising everyone. He had regained consciousness and was now sitting on the ambulance stretcher, his eyes fixed on Brenda with a clarity he had not shown for years. "You didn't build anything, Brenda," he said, each word carrying an ancient pain. "You only destroyed my family, my memories, my life." Tears now flowed freely down George's face, but his voice remained firm. "I remember everything. Now, Clara came to me when she found out about the disease. She wanted me to take care of the girls. They were so small." Kayla approached the stretcher, holding her uncle's hand. Lily followed her, her little fingers intertwining with his. The contact seemed to give strength to George, who continued, "You said you would take care of everything, that you would take them to a good boarding school. You started giving me the medicine soon after, saying it was for depression. I was so foolish, so weak." "It was for your own good," Brenda shouted, her mask of control completely destroyed. "You couldn't make sensible decisions. You were going to donate half of everything we had to those—" "They were my nieces!" George's voice thundered with a force no one expected. "My sister's daughters. How could you be so cruel?" Dr. Paulo intervened, concerned about George's blood pressure. "He needs to go to the hospital immediately. Years of incorrect medication may have caused serious damage." "No," Brenda tried to prevent the ambulance from leaving. "He's not going anywhere without me. I'm his wife. I have rights." It was then that Mrs. Thompson took an envelope out of her bag. "Actually, Mrs. Brenda, you're not going anywhere for now. Clara left a notarized letter before she died. It was kept at the shelter all these years, waiting for the girls to reach a sufficient age." Brenda's face paled. "What letter? What story is this?" "A letter where she tells everything," replied Mrs. Thompson, "about how you prevented her from seeing her brother, how you threatened to send the girls away if she insisted on looking for him. Clara knew she was dying, but she also knew that one day the truth would come to light." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Kayla's restrained sobbing and Lily's soft crying. Years of lies, manipulation, and cruelty were finally coming to light. "The girls are coming with me," said George, his voice now stronger. "They are my family, my blood. And you, Brenda, our marriage is over." As the ambulance departed, carrying George, Kayla, and Lily, Brenda stood in the middle of the room, her fortress of lies crumbling around her. Maria and the other employees began to move, opening windows, letting in fresh air, as if they wanted to cleanse years of darkness and secrets. But the story was not over yet. At the hospital, while doctors performed a battery of tests on George, Kayla held her younger sister's hand and looked out the hallway window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange hues, very similar to that day at the supermarket that had changed their lives. The days at the hospital dragged on with agonizing slowness. George remained hospitalized, his body struggling to rid itself of years of inappropriate medications. The doctors made worried expressions during visits, whispering among themselves about liver damage and possible neurological sequelae. Kayla practically lived at the hospital, dividing her time between caring for Lily and keeping her uncle company. The nights were the worst. George had terrible nightmares, woke up screaming the name of Clara, his deceased sister, begging forgiveness for not having been there when she needed him most. "It wasn't your fault," Kayla whispered, holding his. And on the most difficult nights, Mrs. Brenda fooled everyone. Maria, who had been readmitted as the housekeeper of the house, regularly brought news about Brenda. The woman had refused to leave the mansion, claiming marital rights. She spent her days locked in the master bedroom, drinking and screaming at anyone who tried to approach. "She's destroying everything," Maria said on a particularly tense afternoon. "Tears, photographs, breaks objects, threatens to set fire to the house. We had to hide all the important documents. Dr. Paolo, who was following George's case, called Kayla for a serious conversation in his office. The doctor's grave expression made the girl's heart tighten. "Your uncle is responding well to the detoxification treatment," he began, choosing his words carefully. "But the years of incorrect medication have caused some damage. He will need special care, constant supervision." Kayla felt the tears begin to form. "He's going to be okay, isn't he? We just met. I can't lose him too." The doctor sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Recovery will be slow, Kayla, and there is the possibility that some memories will never return completely. But with love, patience, and the right treatment, he can have a virtually normal life." That night, after Lily finally fell asleep on the sofa bed in the hospital room, Kayla found an old box under George's bed. They were belongings that Maria had brought from the mansion. Old photographs, documents, newspaper clippings. With her heart pounding, she began to examine the contents. There were photos of her young mother, smiling next to George in front of one of the bakeries. In another image, Clara held a baby. Kayla recognized herself, still a newborn. The happiness in her mother's eyes was palpable. She was beautiful, wasn't she? George's voice surprised her. He was awake, watching her with teary eyes. "Clara was always the joy of the family. Our parents died early, it was just the two of us. Until Brenda appeared." Kayla sat on the edge of the bed, spreading the photos on the blanket. "How did you meet? Mrs. Brenda and you?" George closed his eyes, the memories returning painfully. She was the accountant for the bakeries, very efficient, organized. Clara never liked her, said there was something false in her smile. But I was alone, vulnerable. Brenda knew exactly what to say, how to act. A nurse came in to check George's vitals, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When they were alone again, he continued. "After the wedding, Brenda started to change. First, it was small things. She didn't want me to visit Clara, said my sister only looked for me for money. When Clara got pregnant with you, Brenda was furious. She said it was irresponsible, that it would tarnish the family name." Kayla held her uncle's hand tightly, feeling his pain. "And after Mom got sick? It's all so confusing still." George ran his hand through his grey hair. "I remember Clara coming here very thin, crying. Brenda kicked her out, said she was lying about the illness to get money. She started giving me the medicine soon after, saying it was for depression, for high blood pressure." A movement at the door caught their attention. It was Maria, and her expression was one of pure panic. "Mr. George, Kayla, something happened terrible." She could barely speak. "Mrs. Brenda, What is it, Maria?" Kayla stood up, feeling a chill down her spine. What did she do? She found out about the documents that prove that Mr. George is the girl's legal guardian. Maria had tears in her eyes. She found Clara's letter at the courthouse, the one Mrs. Thompson mentioned. And now, spit it out, Maria. George tried to get out of bed, being restrained by Kayla. She's selling everything. The bakeries, the properties. She's already contacted a foreign investor. She says she's going to transfer all the money to an offshore account before Mr. George can stop her. George's heart monitor started beeping frantically. The nurses rushed into the room, pushing Kayla and Maria out. In the hallway, Kayla leaned against the wall, feeling her legs weak. All the empire that her uncle had built, the legacy that should be left to her and Lily, was about to disappear into the hands of that cruel woman. "What are we going to do, Maria?" she whispered, looking at Lily, who continued sleeping, oblivious to all the chaos. I can't let her destroy everything that Uncle George built. Maria hugged the girl tightly. There's one more thing, Kayla. Mrs. Brenda, she hired a lawyer. She's going to try to prove that Mr. George is mentally incompetent, that he can no longer make decisions. Kayla felt the world spin. After everything they had been through, after finally finding their family, Brenda was still trying to separate them. The pain of injustice was almost physical, but something inside her, the same strength that had kept her strong all those years in the shelter, taking care of Lily, began to awaken. She wouldn't let Brenda win. Not this time. We need help, Maria, she said, wiping away her tears with determination. Go to Father Michael from the shelter. He always helped us, always believed in us. And call Mrs. Thompson too. They need to know what's happening. As Maria hurried away, Kayla returned to George, who was now sleeping under the effect of sedatives. She held his hand tightly and whispered, "Hang in there, Uncle. I won't let her hurt us again. I promise." Night fell over the city, bringing with it a sense of urgency. Time was running out, and they needed to act before Brenda managed to carry out her destructive plans. In the silent hospital, Kayla watched over her uncle's sleep, her mind working frantically in search of a solution, while the weight of the whole situation threatened to crush her young heart. The morning arrived grey and cold at St. Joseph's Hospital in Willow Creek. Kayla had dozed off in the armchair next to George's bed, still holding his hand. Lily slept wrapped in a blanket on the couch, her serene little face oblivious to all the storm that was forming around them. The sound of raised voices in the hallway woke Kayla. It was Maria and Mrs. Thompson arguing with someone. The girl's heart froze as she recognized Brenda's shrill voice. "Where is my husband? I demand to see George immediately," the woman shouted, her voice echoing through the silent corridors of the hospital. Kayla got up quickly, positioning herself between the door and her uncle's bed. George began to stir, his eyelids twitching slightly. Brenda burst into the room like a hurricane, dressed in an expensive suit but with deep, dark circles under her eyes and her hair in disarray. Behind her, two men in suits carried briefcases and documents. "Oh, what a touching scene," she mocked, her eyes scanning the room with contempt. "The little family reunited. Enjoy it while it lasts, because it ends today." Father Michael entered soon after, his normally serene face marked with concern. "Mrs. Brenda, please think carefully about what you're doing." "Think?" She laughed, a cold and joyless sound. "I've been thinking for 20 years. I thought, while building this empire, while transforming some neighborhood bakeries into a respected chain. And now you want me to hand everything over to two beggars. They are my nieces." George's weak voice surprised everyone. He was awake, his eyes focused on Brenda with a clarity he had not shown for years. "They are daughters of my sister Clara." "Your sister?" Brenda exploded. "That irresponsible woman who got pregnant without getting married, who lived asking for money. She didn't deserve to be part of this family." "And you deserved it?" Kayla's voice cut through the air like a knife. The teenager was trembling, but she stood firm. "The woman who poisoned her own husband, who separated an entire family for money?" "No," one of the lawyers cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mrs. Brenda, perhaps we should discuss this in private." But Brenda had already lost all control. "You don't understand. I saved this family. When I met George, he was weak, sentimental. He wanted to donate half of the profits to charity. I gave direction to this wealth. I created rules, discipline. You created a prison." Maria stepped forward, years of bitterness in her voice. "Isolated Mr. George from everyone who loved him, controlled every aspect of his life with medicines and lies." "Shut up!" Brenda shouted, throwing her purse against the wall. "I have here a petition to declare George incompetent. The doctors have already confirmed that he is mentally incapacitated due to the drugs. As his wife, I will assume total control of the assets." It was then that Dr. Paulo entered the room, carrying a thick folder of documents. His face was serious, but there was a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Actually, Mrs. Brenda, I have here the results of all of Mr. George's exams," he began, his voice professional and firm, "including detailed toxicological analyses of the last 5 years. Brenda's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the cocktails of medications that you administered to your husband," the doctor continued. "Controlled substances, some without a legal prescription, combined in a way to cause mental confusion and physical dependence." The lawyers looked at each other, visibly disturbed. One of them began to put away his documents discreetly. "This is absurd." Brenda tried to maintain her composure, but her voice trembled. "George has had health problems for years. Everyone knows that." "Problems caused by you," Mrs. Thompson approached, holding an old folder. "Clara left detailed records of everything, of how you threatened her, of how you manipulated George's medicines. She knew that one day the truth would come to light." Brenda staggered, leaning against the wall. Her empire of lies was beginning to crumble. "I'm going to call my lawyers. I'm going to sue all of you," she threatened, but her voice no longer had the same strength. "Your lawyers are already aware of everything," Father Michael spoke softly, "including the suspicious transfers you tried to make last night. All were blocked." It was at that moment that Lily woke up, her sleepy little eyes scanning the room full of people. Seeing Brenda, the girl instinctively shrank back, seeking protection from her sister. The scene seemed to touch something in George. With a visible effort, he sat up in bed, his voice gaining strength. "Enough, Brenda," he said, each word loaded with decades of contained pain. "You will no longer hurt my family. Our marriage is over, and you have 1 hour to get out of my house." "Your house?" she laughed hysterically. "Don't be ridiculous. Half of everything is mine by right." "Actually," one of the lawyers who was with her finally spoke up, "considering the evidence of medical and financial manipulation, you may face serious legal consequences. My advice is to accept a settlement." The silence that followed was deafening. Brenda looked around, realizing that she was alone. All those years of control and manipulation had finally come to an end. With one last hateful look at Kayla and Lily, she left the room, her firm steps echoing through the hallway until they disappeared completely. A week later, George was discharged from the hospital. Recovery would be long, but doctors were optimistic. Without the medications that Brenda forced him to take, his mind was clearer every day. The mansion had been completely transformed. The heavy curtains that Brenda loved so much were replaced by light fabrics that let the sunlight in. The rooms were painted with cheerful colors chosen by Lily, and the kitchen, once a cold and controlled environment, now lived full of laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Kayla went back to studying, fulfilling a dream that seemed impossible during the years in the shelter. Lily was enrolled in a good school, where she soon stood out for her sweet smile and her skill with drawings. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, the three were sitting on the porch of the mansion. George, still in his wheelchair, but with bright and alert eyes, watched his nieces playing in the garden. "Uncle," called Kayla, sitting next to him, "do you regret it, of taking us in that day at the supermarket?" George smiled, taking his niece's hand in his. "Kayla, you weren't just taken in. You saved me. You gave me back life, memories, the ability to love. Your mother would be so proud to see the strong woman you have become." Lily approached, carrying a colorful drawing. "Look, Uncle, I drew us. Kaylee, me, you, and Mom up in heaven." George took the drawing with trembling hands, silent tears running down his face. On the paper, 4 smiling figures hugged under a bright blue sky. They were no longer invisible. They were no longer abandoned. They were a family. "You know what?" he said, pulling the two into a tight hug. "There's a bakery nearby that makes the best donuts in town. What do you think about going there?" The girls smiled, knowing that bakery well. It was one of the many that belonged to their uncle. As they helped George get ready to leave, the afternoon sun bathed the house with its golden light, like a silent blessing on that family that, after so much suffering, had finally found their way back home. Love, after all, had proven to be stronger than any poison. And in that house, now free from the shadows of the past, 3 hearts beat in unison, celebrating not only the victory over evil, but mainly the chance for a fresh start. A fresh start built on foundations of truth, forgiveness, and above all, unconditional love.